Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell welcoming you to today's episode of CAIR on Air. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope all of you are doing well and staying safe. A special thank you to our listeners on American Muslim 360. As always, a pleasure to have you with us. Today's program, inshallah, is going to cover a few different topics. Current events that CAIR is involved in. We're going to start with some good news out of the state of Florida. Then we're going to shift to a situation in Maryland, and then we're going to shift to Utah. So it just shows you the breadth of the work that CAIR is doing, mashallah, all around the country. So to discuss these three states and what's going on, we're going to have two guests with us, special guests. You've seen them before, but let's bring them on now. We have first Zainab Chowdhury, who is the Maryland Outreach Director of the Maryland Office of the Council on American Islamic Relations. Assalamu alaikum, Zainab. How are you?
Walaikum assalam, Edward. I'm doing well, alhamdulillah. How are you doing?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. Thank you for joining us. And we have Justin Sadowski, who is a staff attorney, civil rights attorney, and appellate attorney extraordinaire with CAIR National. Justin, how are you?
I'm doing great, especially after yesterday's news.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So let's dive into the news. So the headline is Laura Loomer, who many of you, if you know her, I'm sorry, but Laura Loomer, anti-Muslim bigot, right-wing extremist, filed a frivolous lawsuit against CAIR National and CAIR Florida some years ago. We had to fight this in court. We won, and we just learned yesterday some good news about the case. So Justin, you and your team have done a lot of work on this case. Give us the good news and the details.
Well, the good news is when there's a saying the young people say, which is play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And the court ordered Laura and her company, Illuminate Media, to pay our attorney's fees to the tune of about $120,000.
That is a hefty sum of money. I mean, it's nothing. Some lawsuits can go bigger than that, but that's still a pretty significant sum of money. My understanding, Justin, is that this, on her end, it was really dumb that it ended this way. The lawsuit itself was inspired by apparently a prank. She was suing. What was she suing us over, Justin? What was her issue?
So if you read through pages and pages of Islamophobic nonsense, what you get is an accusation that Twitter is beholden to the nation of Qatar, and the nation of Qatar is beholden to us because of money that Twitter is also beholden to Qatar. I'd say this because of an investor from the UAE, which is widely known to be best friends with Qatar. It was crazy that we can tell Twitter what to do because they need to be Sharia compliant, and we ordered Laura. We had a meeting with the CEO. We called the CEO and said, you have to meet with us. And we told the CEO that you have to ban Laura Loomer. And that's why Laura Loomer was banned. It had nothing to do with years and years of Islamophobic tweets that people complained about.
It's amazing the power. I'm flattered that people think we have such influence and such power to just call up Twitter and say, do this or do that. But we're influential, but we're not that influential. So a silly lawsuit, and this is not uncommon, right? People file lawsuits because they're just trying to score points, stay in the conversation, make a political point, get these far-right extremists riled up. But as you said, I believe you said, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Zainab, let me turn it over to you. Obviously, you have to deal with anti-Muslim bigots. I hope you've never had to deal with Laura Loomer in particular, but what was your reaction to this news out of Florida?
It's definitely very welcome news. We have not had to deal with Laura Loomer specifically in Maryland, but we obviously have had to deal with a wide range of other sorts of notorious anti-Muslim bigots in different capacities, whether they be guest speakers at different events or what have you. So our hope is that this ruling will definitely help discourage some of these Islamophobes who create these manufactured kind of controversies or grounds to file lawsuits against the organization, our organization and others as well, to think twice before they make that kind of a step.
Absolutely, absolutely. So look, we appreciate the community's support. Your support is, mashallah, what allows us to fight these silly lawsuits when they are filed, and then get back to working on our work, which is serving and defending the community. So we would encourage you all, please donate to support our work and donate to help us fight back against anti-Muslim bigots. They want to distract us from our work. They want to use us as a boogeyman. And in this case, alhamdulillah, it did not work. And your support keeps us strong so we can make sure it does not work in the future, inshallah. So that's good news out of Florida, and also our CAIR Florida team was also sued. They are also part of this lawsuit and emerged victorious as well. Now let's shift to Maryland. So Zainab, tell us, so we all know about the Ben & Jerry's situation. We talked about this last week, that Ben & Jerry's announced they are no longer going to sell their product in the West Bank and occupied Palestinian territory, but they're going to keep selling in Israel within the internationally recognized borders of Israel pre-1967. Despite that, the Israeli government has thrown a what I can mildly describe as a hissy fit, as have their supporters, some of their supporters here in the United States, and have demanded that states that have passed anti-boycott, anti-BDS laws activate those laws against Ben & Jerry. So Maryland doesn't have a law, but they have an executive order that attempts to target Palestinian human rights activists, not in a very coherent way. So Zainab, the Maryland Secretary of State, decided to weigh in on this issue. What did he say, and what's our response?
Right. So, and it's interesting, that, Edward, that you mentioned the Maryland executive order, because it's also important to note that this executive order was enacted after several failed attempts to pass a bill through the Maryland state legislature. So there was overwhelming opposition to this particular measure, just because obviously it's unconstitutional, it's anti-free speech, but then it was introduced as an executive order and signed into law by Governor Hogan. And so now we expect this kind of a pushback from different states who are being pressured by pro-Israel groups who are trying to mobilize their entities to try to discourage other organizations or corporations from supporting similar measures. And so in Maryland, the Secretary of State, John Wobensmith, he has pledged to investigate and take action against any Ben & Jerry's contracts that are currently pending or active in the state of Maryland. And we are deeply concerned by this move, because not only is Ben & Jerry's action not necessarily pro-BDS, which is what the executive order targets, but it's also unconstitutional on the grounds of free speech. It's against the First Amendment free speech rights that are guaranteed to all Americans, including American corporations. And our government should not be in the business of chilling free speech by punishing companies or individuals who choose to promote and support human rights, issues. And the fact that, we are a country that is governed by the Constitution, which is the law of the land, that guarantees that these rights be preserved and upheld, is something that we are encouraging our Secretary of State to take into account, to cease this investigation into Ben & Jerry's, to allow this corporation to take its principled stand, and not to cave into pressure that they're facing that at the state level, to take action against Ben & Jerry's.
I mean, it's remarkable to think a state government has the time to devote state resources to investigating and taking action against an ice cream company over a decision that is made halfway around the world. I mean, it's if you stop and think about it, it boggles the mind. Justin, give us some background on this Maryland executive order. I know we're in court fighting it. Share your perspective on this.
We are in court fighting it, and it's really what the Secretary of State did is particularly galling because of that. The executive order, I mean, these laws are not necessarily the most well-written laws in the first place, because, it's hard to define without making it obvious on its face that you're targeting speech, what a boycott of Israel is. And so they all try and define it, but they use vague terms. But we filed a lawsuit in the District of Maryland because charges unconstitutional on behalf of Saqib Ali. Saqib is a former Maryland delegate and a computer scientist in computer programming who would like to engage in a contract to do computer programming for the state, but cannot because he boycotts Israel. And but he does so in his personal capacity, not in his capacity as a computer programmer, right? Like, that's just him showing up, as an independent contractor and doing the work. This matters because the government argued and got our case dismissed by saying that this confusing mishmash of that is this executive order only applies to when you boycott Israel in your capacity as a contractor. And Ben & Jerry's, in a procurement contract for ice cream, clearly does not sell ice cream in the West Bank in its capacity as a contractor with Maryland. So they're now telling the courts that this is a really narrow law and it should be construed very narrowly as to do nothing to the courts when challenged. But then they're writing letters saying that they're going to on a much different, broader interpretation. This is really concerning, not just under the First Amendment, but it just is a matter of general fairness and professional and legal ethics, to be honest.
Gotcha. So it sounds like, I mean, this is not only just as a policy matter, of course, we oppose it, but just as a legal matter while they're in court, they may have just made a mistake by now indicating that they're trying to interpret their law in a broader way than what they indicated the law was meant to do in court.
I think mistake is very generous. I think these laws they've always tried to outwardly claim these laws do a lot of things because they want to show the world that they are standing up for Israel. But then when the courts get involved and they're trying to defend it, then they try and say, oh, no, it doesn't do anything at all. It basically does nothing. You shouldn't opine on its constitutionality. And this has been a strategy in every case we've litigated, not just but it's never been such a galling contrast between reality and representations in court as what we're seeing now.
Gotcha. And I guess we should note for the record that CAIR has won victories against these types of laws, policies in Georgia, in Texas, and Arizona. And the ACLU won a victory recently in Arkansas. And so every time these laws are challenged, so far, they eventually fall. And the Maryland case is the one exception that is ongoing. So Zainab, we've called on the Maryland Secretary of State to cancel his threat, withdraw his threat to investigate an ice cream company and take this unconstitutional action against it. You know, is the Secretary of State, I mean, I don't know if he's a Democrat, Republican, what his political leanings are, but if this couldn't pass the state legislature, and if the ACLU of Maryland and others have spoken out against this type of stuff, I assume that we're not actually going to see any action taken against Ben Jerry's. At least that's my hope.
Well, look, we know that this is also just part of a broader strategy to discourage other companies from doing the same. These tactics are devised to help put pressure on on companies and corporations to discourage them from engaging in any kind of activity that would make it seem as though they're opposing Israel's policies. You know, Israel is a country that is a state that has been complicit in human rights violations. Renowned human rights groups like Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights group, actually have clearly stated that Israel is guilty of crimes of apartheid. The fact that there are still entities and factions that claim that Israel should be given a free pass, that corporations should be punished if they choose to resist against these kind of policies in any form, way, shape, or form, is not only unconstitutional, as just mentioned earlier, but also unethical. And just on a moral ground, we have an obligation and a responsibility to push back with all of the tools that we have in our toolbox to make sure that our elected officials, our state governments are not enacting policies that are going to penalize or punish anyone or any corporation for taking a principled stance when it comes to these issues. There are numerous local activists and organizations, groups who are mobilizing, who are strategizing on how we can more actively, more cohesively resist against the Secretary of State's announcement. We don't believe that there is going to be any substantial outcome from his announcement, but we do want there to be very public, knowledge that there's going to be resistance against these attempts to intimidate and undermine any attempts to stand up for human rights for not only Palestinians, but any marginalized group or organization.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Sam. So now let's go to the last, thank you both for the perspective on that. Now let's go to the last topic, which is we filed action in Utah, Justin, on behalf of a man named Alan Goodson. Tell us about that case. So
Alan Goodson is a Muslim. He converted to Islam, as many people do. He is a mechanic, and he started his job at Bradshaw Automotive or Bradshaw Chevrolet in Utah back when he was a Christian, and converted while he was there. And after his conversion, he faced a very hostile work environment. He was called all sorts of names. I'm sure many of you, unfortunately, have been called the same names. I don't need to dignify by listing them. He was denied the right to take off work to do Friday Juma or daily prayer. He was insulted, teased, belittled, and ultimately, when he was had hours taken away from him because of his religion, because they said that, I'm going to take hours away because you want to spend more time with Allah anyway. he told his bosses that he was going to file a complaint with the EEOC, which is Every American's Right, and in response, they fired him. They're going to deny a lot of these facts, and the legal issues in this case are actually not very complicated. This is as cut and dry of a violation of Title VII as one could see. The only question is whether a jury will believe Alan, which they absolutely should. His story is a story we've all seen and heard about, and it's as honest as one as I've ever seen.
Yes, and I've had the pleasure of reading a bit about Alan and reading about the case and seeing some of the things that were said about him, and his willingness to speak up for himself, to come to CAIR for help, to hold on to his faith is admirable, and we're happy that Justin, you and the team are defending him. And again, we've talked now about Laura Loomer in Florida, Larry Hogan, Secretary of State in Maryland, and now you've got a corporation and a company, a business in Utah. It just shows you the breadth of the work that CAIR is doing, mashallah, around the country. So we thank you for the work on that. We look forward to hearing more about that case as it proceeds. And Zainab, we thank you for the work you're doing in Maryland as well. We look forward to continuing to hear about that, inshallah. And the last thing I want to note to our viewers is all this work is made possible with your support. So please continue to support CAIR and our chapters, inshallah, so we can do this work, defend the Alan Goodsons of the world, stand up against the illegal executive orders and anti-boycott laws, and also push back against anti-Muslim bigots that try to distract us from our work. Thank you so much for your support. Inshallah, we will see you next Tuesday for the next episode of CAIR on Air at 3 p.m. Until then, assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you.